All right, good morning, everybody joining us for our next online presentation, Ancient Plants. My name is Chrissy Smith, and I'm the Executive Director for the Friends of Netarts Bay Watershed Estuary Beach and Sea, which we tend to abbreviate to Friends of Netarts Bay WEBS. We are a small organization dedicated to sustaining the Netarts Bay area through education and stewardship. We try hard to bring learning opportunities to the local community, both to school groups and to the public, so that they can learn about this beautiful place we live in and the natural resources that are here and why conserving them is an important thing to do. We strive to do all of this for free, so there's no barriers to anybody participating. And we just truly believe if we can connect people to the wonders of this area, then they will protect it and keep it safe and keep it in their hearts as they're exploring, living, or working here. So today, we are bringing yet another virtual presentation because of the uncertain times that we live in, and certainly today is an extra uncertain kind of day. So we thank you for taking the time to visit with us this morning. We have with us Slade Sapora. Hi, Slade. And Slade was here with us at the beginning of the month to do birds, and now he's back to do a little bit about plants. So if you streamed in for that one, then you kind of got to meet Slade, but if not, Slade's a local Tillamook resident who works now at the Tillamook High School. He was born and raised in Brookings, Oregon, actually, and spent the rest of his life learning about the natural wonders all over the world, actually. He has a degree from Portland State in biology with an emphasis in botany and a minor in geology. And then he got his master's in teaching in 2013. Slade has an interesting background in doing research and education kind of related jobs. He spent a lot of time researching birds up in Alaska and various other places around the world. But of course, he's kind of has this deep founded love for plants, as I've come to learn over time. And he's bringing some of that here with us today. Overall, I would say that we're just very lucky to have Slade as a teacher in our community. And thanks for joining us for another program, Slade.
Yes, this is fun for me. This is the second time I've done this presentation, and I spent a lot of time on it last night and a little bit this morning, just making some changes and adjusting, so it's always fun to do these things. Yeah, so let's get started. Well, hi, I'm Slade. I do teach at Tillamook High School. I teach biology and marine biology, and this is a little picture on the right I threw down of my family. Took this last year over in John Day fossil beds. There's just some native sunflowers blooming there. And I just wanted to give a little shout out to my first botany teacher, Dr. Rhoda Love. Anybody that's deep in the botany game in Oregon knows who Rhoda Love is. And I was fortunate enough to really honestly stumble into a botany class at the age of 21 at Lane Community College in Eugene. And I think it was always a passion of mine. I'd worked for the Forest Service doing fire crew and as a fire lookout, and then just stumbled into that class and really just opened the door on the whole natural world, really, from a different perspective. And so just props to her. Okay, so let's jump into this. This is a really fun one for me because it kind of lets us take a look at plants, at least for me, and hopefully for you guys, in just a whole different light and really the natural world. And so what I really start out doing is zooming way out, and then we get this, hopefully, this bigger picture, and then we kind of zoom back in. And the purpose for doing that partly is to give some context for what we're talking about, and also to really work on some of the biases that we inherently have when we think about the natural world and we think about plants. We definitely view these things through these filtered lenses of culture and history that we don't even see that we're doing. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this. I got a question for us there. So we're going to zoom way out. We're going to go to the beginning of time, and then we'll find ourselves in today by the end of this. At least that's what I hope. Okay, so I want to start with just like a timeline of the universe, and really life itself is where we're going to end up here in just a hot second. So Earth itself and the history of Earth and life on Earth really begins, well, Earth begins about 4.8, 4.6 billion years ago. And then life on Earth begins not that long after that. And And when we look at living organisms and when we look at life, plants are an extension of that first fundamental life form, because plants make their own food. And so they do this process that everything else is sort of tied to and hinged to. So they are the original life form in a way, or they carry the genes and the features of those early life forms on with them. But our solar system, you know, and our planet is pretty young. When you look at the expansion of the universe from what we know, right, at this point, you know, close to 14 billion years old, and our planet's only 4 billion years old. So we're in this last little circle on the right here. And life on Earth, this is from a slide I directly took from my marine biology class, so that's the outline format here. But I find this stuff just super fascinating. So when the Earth first formed, it was this really hot, sort of molten accretionary planet, right? And when our solar system first formed, right, the sun is in the middle, and then all of the debris, right, around that, and the debris being all of the different elements, started to basically like circle in, and the heaviest stuff went to the middle and the lighter stuff to the outside. Thus we get the gas giants and the gas planets on the outside, and the hard stony planets in the middle with the heavy metals and things like that. And when the Earth first formed, you know, what do I say here, 4.8 billion years ago, it went through this period where it was spinning around, and there was so much debris left in our solar system that we call this the sweep up time. And this picture on the right really sort of depicts it. And so the crust was still forming, it was still molten, and we were slamming into stuff, you know, every day as we moved around the sun, we would just pick up stuff. I liken it to a construction site after you've built a house, but before you've done any cleanup or landscaping. You've got bits of wood and, you know, screws and nails and just stuff everywhere, and you've got to go around and clean it up. And that's what we did. And so for the first really 500 million years, the planet was just sweeping this stuff up, and you know, the moon formed as a result of that, one of those impacts. At least that's the theory there. And oceans didn't begin to form until around 400 million years ago or so. So for that first period of, about 4 billion years ago, so that first 800 million years of Earth existence, it was a hot molten place. Once the sweep up finished and the surface of the Earth cooled below 212 degrees Fahrenheit, water began to be able to form as vapor, and then from escaping from the rocks, and then begin to condense and then actually fall as rain. And that's when the first oceans we see start to form. So if anything would have been like, you know, Noah's floods or something like that, this would have been that time when it would have rained a lot. And this produced our present day oceans. Now, the oceans at this time would have been fresh water. And this is an interesting fact. And our oceans have got saltier over time by eroding rocks and, you know, bits of the crust dissolving in water, and then water evaporating, but then leaving that behind. And as continents formed and things like that, it got saltier and saltier to where today it is 96.5% pure water and about 3.5% dissolved compounds. So it is slowly getting saltier with time, very slowly. And so life needs water. And so life doesn't even have a chance, right, until about this 4 billion year mark, when water starts to form and the atmosphere cools for the chemical reactions that we know, at least life on Earth here require. So the earliest life forms on Earth are these things called Archaea. They've been called Archaea, Archaebacteria in the past. They're in their own separate group completely. They're in their own separate domain of life. They're that different. But these first evidence of these show up around 3.7 billion years ago. And so not shortly after the oceans formed, we find evidence of these things existing here on Earth, and they still exist today. They're in a group of what we call extremophiles. Today they live in extreme places, like hot springs, Yellowstone, the Grand Prismatic. You can find them at Lassen Park as well. And they make up these mats. Now these are tiny microscopic things, very, very microscopic, you know, bacterial or smaller in size. And again, you could fit 1 million of them on a single millimeter. So if you look at a millimeter, you get about 1 million on there. That's a lot. And they're what we call prokaryotes. They have no nucleus. That's some biology stuff for you there. and just again shortly after the oceans formed. And the different colors in here, interestingly enough, represent different species. So these are different temperature regimes as you go through here. It's hotter in the middle and cooler in the outside, and so they've evolved. You can actually see this sort of I guess what we might refer to as ecotyping across this gradient here. So these are the first life forms we know of on Earth. And this is the kind of stuff as biologists look for life on other planets that we're looking for, right? And the potential for it to be there is huge. The potential for the similar types of forms to exist on the moons of Saturn or Jupiter, it is large. We just don't have the technology yet to go there and look. We're looking on Mars as well, but I think those icy moons are even a better spot to find this kind of stuff. So this is the first life form on Earth, and we find evidence of these in fossils called stromatolites. You may have heard of these, and these are made by these mats of Archaea, and then later on by bacteria as well. And the first evidence for Archaea is that they're what we call chemoautotrophs. So an autotroph is an organism that makes its own food. Plants do this through photosynthesis. Plants are photoautotrophs, and but these were chemoautotrophs, similar to the organisms we find deep down in the ocean. They were getting their energy through the geologic chemistry that was going on, through sulfur compounds and other things that were deteriorating and breaking down from hot vents in the crust. And stromatolites, there's fossil beds around the planet with these. A few. Australia, this is a real famous one, and I think England has another one there, or the British Isles somewhere there as well. And these date back to be really old. You can cut into them and see with a microscope, you know, what they are formed from. It's pretty cool stuff. And there's only a few of these left, right? Rocks from 3 billion years old. That's a pretty hard thing to find. You know, with plate tectonics, rocks get recycled. So first life forms there. I have a link onto the presentation, and I think Chrissy will post a link to my presentation, so you're free to look at it later. And throughout it, if you noticed, anything in blue I have as a hyperlink, so it's something that you could click on and go to. And a really awesome app is this Earthviewer app, and it comes from Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And if you're interested in anything to do with evolution or ecology, they have a ton of wonderful educational videos and interactives that they've designed and that are free. So as a teacher, I use these all the time. And I'll just bring you over to the app so you can see it really quickly here. Oh, there it is. And on the sidebar here, you can kind of scroll up and down and go through time. So we're starting at the very formation of the Earth. And I have outlined on here, you can turn these things on and off. I have on here the coastlines of today, just to give you some reference. So we're really looking at the Indian Ocean here. And there you can see the oceans forming.
Okay, so you can't actually see that. So can you share your screen again?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah,
okay.
No worries.
I think you just need to select that particular one.
Yep, I do. How's that?
That I can see.
Excellent. Okay, great. So I'll back it up here. So yes, so here's the Earthviewer app, as you can see it. I'm not trying to plug anything here, it's free. And on this one here, so you can scroll through on the sidebar and you could just go through these events in Earth history, and you can watch the plates move around. You can see the first continents form. And then on the sidebar, there are these little events that you could click, and it'll give you more information, such as the oldest eukaryotes. It brings up a cool little box. And so they've really synthesized a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today, and you can scroll through it on the sidebar, and I will come back to it in a minute. But you can see the first oceans forming, and then you're going through a huge period of time here where if you see land, there's nothing happening, right? Everything is in the ocean, and we're going to keep talking about that as we go. Okay, so looking at the history of life on Earth then, right? We've got the history of the universe here on the left, and then our solar system forms water, single-celled life, and then we get to photosynthesis, right? Archaea and Archaebacteria do a lot of chemosynthesis, and then they are the first plants to, or organisms to do photosynthesis. So we can jump over here on the right and we can blow this up. They lead to an increase in oxygen in the atmosphere. And so they lead to organisms that are consumers that can use oxygen, and then photosynthesis evolves, and this is a game changer. But photosynthesis we're not talking about plants yet. We're still talking about bacteria. And you can see we have a huge period of time here as well. We're talking from 4 billion years all the way up to 2 billion years. This is in hundreds of millions. Here, where we first get our first eukaryotes, which we'll talk about in just a second here. So the first organisms to do photosynthesis are these cyanobacteria, and these evolved around 3 billion years ago. So these come out of the Archaea, and they're different. These are bacteria. And what they have is elements that plants have today. They have similar things to plants have these discs inside their chloroplast called thylakoids. The outer membrane here is called thylakoides. And these organisms are responsible for changing the Earth's atmosphere. We can still find them today. We get these blooms of these, people often call them green algae, but they're actually cyanobacteria. I just saw an article in the Tillamook Headline Herald today. There's a warning in some lakes about these. These in excessive numbers can produce toxins. But these were the first organisms to actually produce oxygen here on Earth. And this was a real game changer. And they changed the Earth's atmosphere. Now, there's a really important event that leads to plants. Right around 2.7 billion years ago or so. Again, we don't know exactly when this happened, but what happened is that a cyanobacteria invaded another type of organism or another type of cell and began to live inside of it. And it's what we call the endosymbiotic event. And so endo meaning inside and symbiosis meaning two organisms sharing a mutually beneficial relationship. We have examples of this today. We have mitochondria that live inside of us and help us get energy. And at one time, mitochondria were bacteria. They have bacterial DNA, which we carry with us. Still today, they have the membranes of bacteria. And chloroplasts are very similar. When this happened, you go from these single-celled, tiny little cyanobacteria to larger organisms that have more organelles and can start to diversify in form. So you get your first single-celled eukaryotes with a nucleus and with these little organelles. And this is a game changer for life on Earth, and this leads to plant evolution. Now, during this time, and we're talking about the first 2 billion years of life on Earth, right? We're talking about the Earth being, a little over 4 billion years old, this being the first 2 billion. If you would have flown over Earth in a space probe 2 billion years ago when this was going on, this is what it would have looked like. It would have looked from the air devoid of life. There was no life on rocks. There was no life on land. And even in the ocean, life was just single-celled. It was planktonic, microscopic. And much like moons of other planets to us look today, you would have had to really look deep and hard to find anything there. And it would have been in the water, and it would have been plankton at this point. Now, this bacteria invading another bacterial-like shell leading to eukaryotes leads to things like diatoms and dinoflagellates, which are phytoplankton today, producing half the world's oxygen. And this leads to the evolution of algae. Algae are, a lot of people think of algae as plants, or they think of them as being part of the plant kingdom, and they're not actually. They're in their own separate group, but they led to plants. And so these are the first eukaryotic, meaning they have a nucleus and chloroplasts, photosynthetic organisms. They have a pretty simple cell structure. There's not vascular tissue in them. There's not roots. There's nothing like that. But there's 3 different groups of algae. There's red, brown, and green. And the red and brown algae are the big seaweeds and kelps we think of today. They dominate the oceans. Green algae dominate freshwater, and a small fraction of them actually exist in the ocean. And so different from plants and lacking those complex characteristics. These first appear in the range of 2 to 1 billion years ago, that we start to see the single-celled and then the more complex algae mats that you can find today. An example here is a bay with the tide out. These are green algae. All right, so plants, kinda. First up, the green algae. So these are the first multicellular photosynthetic organisms. Before this, it was single-cell planktonic. You would have flown over it in some kind of a spacecraft. You wouldn't have seen it. Now you could actually see life as these bats. This is on the left is a common one. We'll find it in our rivers in the summertime. Some of you, maybe you've grown up in this area, go swimming in the summer in the rivers, and as a kid, you would grab this and throw it at your friends. It's fun. On the right is a common marine algae that we have called ulva or sea lettuce, and this is what is used to make nori rolls. So we eat this, or some of us do. And this first evolved in what's called the Precambrian era. This whole time frame I've been talking about is the Precambrian. And this is around 1 billion years ago and moved on to land around 850 million years ago. Okay, I want to jump in and just give a little context here about the geologic timescale, because we refer to a lot of these eras and times, and if you've never taken a geology class, you may not be familiar with this, and you may nod your head like, okay, but I can probably contextualize this to where it makes a little bit of sense. The geologic timescale is divided into time frames around major geologic and biologic events. That's where we come up with these markers about when to kind of bracket our time frames. And this gives us sort of an evidence-based lens to look back and kind of read the story of the planet Earth. Again, sort of doing away with some of our bias and being opening to what the evidence tells us. But much of the geologic timescale is also based around the evolutionary events of animals. So everything I've talked about so far falls in the Precambrian, this big block on the left, and it's considered an eon. It goes from the beginning of Earth itself, over 4.5 billion years ago, all the way up to around 541, million years ago. So 90% basically of Earth's history is in this Precambrian era, and it gets broken up into other brackets of time. The Hayden is when the Earth is fiery, that's Hades, right? The crust is still forming, we're accreting stuff. And then we get the Archean for Archaebacteria sort of dominating Earth and life itself. And then we get into, the Cyanobacteria, and then the first single-celled eukaryotic things. All of this is kind of piled into this time frame, and it's not really broken up into many small parts. Now, so that's all of this, right? Before we even get to algae, we're all talking single-celled. So think about how much time evolution is just cooking away at these tiny little minuscule changes in things. We don't see big jumps in this until right around this time up in here, right? What we call the Cambrian Explosion or the Cambrian radiation at about 541 million years ago. And then we take this slice right up in here, right? And we break it into 3 eras, which we've probably heard of: Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. And then we divide those up into all of these eras. Many of us are familiar with the Mesozoic. The time of dinosaurs consists of the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. Anybody that's had a dinosaur book as a kid, which is probably everybody, is familiar with these time frames. But earlier on in that, we get the Paleozoic, the age of fishes as well. But again, centered around animals, not plants. The analogy I could make here would be that, this would be human beings leaving Africa, or let's say even the dawn of agriculture, right? And for 10, 12,000 years, we grind away at very slow progress. And then all of a sudden, we get the scientific revolution or something like that, right? This big advancement in technology that in 500 years, we've sped ahead at such a dramatic rate. And it would be similar in evolution here. We have an advance in technology, and that technology is cellular technology. We've gone from simple single-celled to single-celled, but with different parts, to multi-celled. And once we get into the multi-celled game, we begin to just have so many options in which evolution can start to work, and things can branch and diversify. And a big leap is moving on to land, which is what we're going to talk about next, in plants. Boop. All right, so play a little game here for you. Let's get interactive. I'm going to say a word, And this is a game I do in all my classes, biology class especially. I'm going to say a word, and I want you to write the first thing that comes into your mind. So first thing, I say write because you're going to be maybe typing. I have my students do this on paper too, and then they share it out. So the word I'm going to say is animal. So I say animal, what's the first thing that comes into your mind? So take a second and you can type that into the chat bar. And while we're doing that, I have a chat question that I just saw pop up. How long ago was that? Not very long ago. Bean Metcalf, are these very early Archaea and diatom soil cores found in places like the Mariana Trench? That's a really good question. You would think that the deepest things would contain some of the oldest things, but the Marianas Trench, being an active trench, is generally recycling stuff pretty quickly. Where you find these really old fossils generally are in what we call basement rocks, meaning if you were to dig down into the basement, look for the oldest things. And those tend to be on continents, actually. Russia has some. Australia is actually a big piece of what we call continental craton. It's like the heart rock of a continent. The things come and go as they slam into it and attach and you know, get subducted or calved off or eroded. But the center of a continent really isn't under that much attack. It can be flat, like parts of our continent. Canada has some craton in it, and the Grand Canyon, if you go down there, actually has some basement rock about 3-something billion years old at the very bottom of the Grand Canyon. But that rock is metamorphic. Most of the time, the oldest rock is metamorphic. It's been warped and pushed and compressed. So looking for old diatom soil cores, you know, and now we're talking in the order of 2 billion years old. That's why we have this range of 2 to 1. The geologic record is not that intact. And then in the places where you do have rocks that old, are they from, and do they tell the story that you need to be told for that, you know, time? Are you looking at rocks that are 2 billion years old that are volcanic? Nothing. So, okay, we got some answers here. Great. Says the 8-year-old, cats. Hey, cats are popular. Okay, so we got cats, humans, animal. First thing that comes to mind, diverse, planet, vegetable. Good. This is interesting. Moving. I like the idea of moving. One of the characteristics of plants is that they don't get up. I mean, they can lean, you know, there's that heliotropism, but they're not up and walking around, and thus they store energy in really a starch, which is kind of cumbersome. Animals generally don't do that. We store it as fat. It's much denser. Oh, what's the one part of a plant that does move, that needs to be transported, that needs to be high energy, so it uses fat instead of starch? I'm gonna let that hang for a minute because we're gonna get back to that actually. So we got some great answers here. I should have said think of the type of animal. So I got cat, human. I'm good with this. This is good. So most of the time when I have students do this, and I've been doing this, this is my authentic idea, I guess, but I've been doing this for several years, and I've never had a variation on this, although, you know, sometimes people will throw out some good ones. Most of the time people name things like cat, human, zebra, lion, maybe a fish, turtle, snake. Think about what all of those things have in common. Okay, and this is a good example when I'm talking about biases. So what all of those things have in common, and most of the time when I say name an animal, now every now and then someone will say something like snail or jellyfish. But most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time, people say something that has a backbone. It has a backbone in vertebrae. When I say animal, you think something with a backbone. Most people do. That's the first thing that pops into their head, at least with high schoolers consistently. And 95% of the time, people are 95% wrong. Only about 5%, 85% of all animals do not have a backbone, are what we would call invertebrates. And it's real simple to divide life up that way too, right? Vertebrate, invertebrate, and even that is a bias because invertebrate is a group of 8 other phyla. You could break it up even into more, consisting of sponges, jellyfish, cnidarians, echinoderms like sea stars, many different worms, 3 worms, mollusks, and then the biggest group of animals at all, arthropods, consisting of insects and crustaceans. So 95% of animals do not have a backbone, yet we think that they do because they're like us. Things with backbones tend to dominate land. And if you look at the vertebrate groups here, okay, herbivore beaver, I like that one. If you look at the vertebrate groups here, 50% of them are fishes actually. And yet most people will name an animal. Now, if you're gonna name a vertebrate, most people will name a vertebrate that's not actually like most vertebrates. They'll name a mammal generally, which is only 9%, right? Birds make up about 20 there. And fishes you could divide into 3 groups. Actually, fish should be divided into 3 groups. There's 7 different groups of vertebrates. Actually, fish, anyway, I won't go too much in. I teach marine biology, so you can see my bias coming in right here. And this is what I mean by a bias. A bias isn't something that you do that is inherently wrong or off. It's something you do without even knowing that you're doing it in the first place. And I think that as we kind of look at cultural biases, especially relevant right this week, we have to really focus on those things, right? Well, what is in us that we do without even noticing, and you know, or that we expect, or that we predict. Without even thinking about. So without belaboring this too much, this really goes into the plant kingdom as well. We have a lot of these biases, and we've built a lot of our structures around these biases as well. A geologic timescale is one that is built a lot around this. It doesn't pop off, and partly that's because of the evidence, but it doesn't really pop off, right? So let's back it up here. Right, this whole big red block here is like 90-something% of Earth's time, right? From 4.5 billion to 1 billion, not even close to it. And then the geologic record really doesn't even take off until right up in here, because that's when all the evidence is. You get multicellular things, they make good fossils as well, but it's obviously, a lot of it's named around animals. When you look at a diagram here of the geologic record, it gives you the time periods, and it's just showing you animals here with a few little tree trunks and ferns, but mostly animals. And there's some important events that happen around this Cambrian explosion, though. This is 541 million years ago, right down in here. We suddenly see this Cambrian radiation. We see these animal phylums that I just talked about start to diversify and take off. And multicellularity leads to this like cellular technology explosion. And then you get all of these different time periods that we can see in the fossil record, marked by things like the first fish, and then the first terrestrial plants, and then after that, the first amphibians, and then sharks, and then on and on and on, right? First reptiles, right after the amphibians. So my question is, what paths did life take as it moved onto land? What do you think the first things were to move onto land? And again, this is maybe where some of our biases might come in, or we can explore them, which is fun. What path do you think life took as it moved on? What did life have to do to move on to land? Because life is really water-based. So much of our cellular structure, even our bones themselves, being made of calcium. It's one of the most abundant elements in the ocean. It's why coral reefs are made of. It's what starfish make their exoskeletons. It's what clams make their shells out of. And it's what vertebrates make their bones out of, because we evolved in water, our ancestors did. So what paths did life take as it moved on to land? What did life need to do to move on to land? What advancements did it have to have in the first place? And this is an interesting one, because during this first part of the Cambrian radiation, we really see, and this is all in the ocean. This is the age of fishes. This is life diversifying in the ocean. This is jellyfish and sponges and mollusks and other things like that radiating out. You still would have flown over and not seen anything on land for the first big chunk of that. So lungs, that's one, right? The ability to breathe. And for fish, that was true. Life, more to land answer. Lungs, waterways, right? So yeah, life moved up waterways from the ocean. That's exactly right. It moved into freshwater environments with the green algae and stuff. It followed them like veins inland, and then from there it crept up, right? So amphibians moving into water, fish moving onto land. Aquatic plants adapting to a dry atmosphere. That's the first one. That's the first one that we have to jump across, because one of our biases is animals. But look here, first terrestrial plants and animals. Plants come first, then animals. Plants lead the way. Plants have always led the way. Things were photosynthetic before they were heterotrophic, before they were consumers. You had to have something to consume in the first place. Plants are the basis for every ecosystem, or producers, photosynthetic organisms are. Everything is built off them. I had a botany teacher, Bob Misley, who basically said, plants don't need us, we absolutely need them. Yet we're kind of taught that we're the center of the universe and everything was made around and for us, when really we're just parasites on the backs of plants, so to speak. Cool perspective. So what features did plants need? Well, if you look down here at another geologic time scale, and again, you get this Cambrian explosion down at the bottom here with fishes, and then other forms of life like mollusks and things like that. When life first moves on to land, oops, we're looking down in here, you'll see the first sort of plants moving on to land, and then you see them get vascular, which we're going to talk about shortly after, adapting to a dry atmosphere. They have to move water around because they're not immersed in it anymore. And then the first amphibians follow, probably because insects came in, right? Some type of organisms were coming out, or crustaceans, similar to roly-polies, the little potato bugs you find in your yard. Those are actually a type of a crustacean, which is kind of cool. They're an isopod, more specifically. So, and then animals that wanted to eat those came along, right? So they followed the plants onto land. So moving out of the water, you get your ancestral green algae. And this is a photo I took over at Short Beach, or Many Steps Beach. It's just sits in between Cape Mears and Oceanside, in a little cove there. And there's a wonderful waterfall. I have some pictures of it later that comes down there. And waterfalls are awesome spots because you see all of these plants gathered in the back of the waterfall. They sit behind it, and they need to constantly be wet. And you've got examples of all the first early land plants here, right? So we have back in here, these are liverworts. Right in here, and then you get mosses, and then you start to see some club mosses over to the side as well. So the first thing that plants had to do to come on were actually mosses. I'm going to talk about those, and they had just adapted to be being dried out a little bit, but mostly they were right near excuse me, water. And then as plants start to kind of advance inland and into drier and drier habitats, taking advantage of resources that weren't being competed over by other organisms, they developed things like roots, stems, vascular systems, and then seeds to disperse with on land. So the first plants on land are these bryophytes, and these consist of mosses and liverworts. These are multicellular photosynthetic organisms. They have a really unique reproductive strategy, alteration of generations, and I won't go into it here, but I have a hyperlink to it that you can check out. These first show up around 470 million years ago. So we're well into the Cambrian explosion by about 60 million years before plants even move on to land. This changed the Earth's atmosphere, yet again, began to change the Earth's atmosphere yet again to what we have today. The first big change was photosynthesis itself, around 2 billion years ago. But this is another big change here. These guys don't have a vascular tissue though. If you look at them under a microscope, or even just through a light with a hand lens, you see cell structure, but you don't see veins and arteries. You don't see a xylem and phloem. You don't see anything moving nutrients or water around. So they have to grow where it is moist. And the other thing they do is they reproduce by spores. So they got these little spore pods up here, which will pop and then disperse, usually with water. They'll blow into the air, but then they get carried away by rainwater. This is the exact same way that algae reproduce, because these are the descendants of algae. They have So many characteristics they share with algae, much more, I would say, than they do with plants. Yet it's our first branch into stepping into the plant kingdom here. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so here's a picture I took at that waterfall. And my question here is, what doesn't belong in this photo, right? And besides Tatum, that's my son there, it's everything growing around him as well. It's grasses and things with stems and branches and woody tissue, and it's angiosperms, which you can see up here is salal and grass. The first life forms were over here in these waterfalls, and they crept up through waterways, right? Like creeping up like veins and arteries through the land from green algae. And here's some other pictures that I took at that same waterfall here. So you can see starting to get some liverworts down in here, and definitely this is what we call a snake liverwort, some people call it alligator skin liverwort, Conicephalum conicum, right in here. Really, really pretty plant, and often hidden. You have to kind of look in these cracks to find it, but take a look at it if you do find it. It looks yeah, it looks crocodilian to me, the skin on it. It's really pretty. The next jump in plant evolution, so 470 million years, now we're at 420 million years. 50 million years is a long time. If you think about 50 million years, that's the age of mammals, basically, right? That's mammal radiation started about 55 million years ago, and here we are today. So to get just from non-vascular to vascular took that long with plants. And now we got club mosses. And club mosses are basically mosses, but with almost like little root-like structures, rhizomes, which are modified stems, lead to roots, but they have vascular tissue. They can transport water from down here up to here. That allows them to elevate to get advantage of light, and also to then disperse their spores, you know, out farther around them. So this is a competitive advantage that they have. And examples of those that we have in our area are club mosses. They like to drape over things. We see them on big leaf maples, and they're the things that hang down like Spanish moss. Now, Spanish moss, I believe, is a lichen. If I'm correct in that. I'm not from Louisiana, didn't live there very well. But these guys will hang down, and then they can gather water up here and transport it down here where they can hang down and get advantage of light in the drier air below. And they often cover rocks as well. And the common one in our area is Selaginella or Archaea. It's got a number of different common names, but you can see it as a big draping moss. It also grows in the redwood forest. I've seen these quite a bit. Okay, so we're looking at different time scales here as we jump around. We talked about liverworts and mosses. Hornworts are another group in that. And we're back here still in the 400 million year range. We get the first vascular plants, right, around 425, 430 with club mosses. And now we're going to make some even bigger jumps and some cool connections here about to be made to some of our modern day issues environmentally. Going to talk about, and you can kind of see that right in here with the CO2 discussion we're about to have. So ferns and horsetails, these are probably the ones that everybody would know what a fern is if you mention it. Most people know what moss is that live in this area because it grows on everything. But ferns and horsetails are in their own special group. They have a vascular system. They have differentiated reproductive tissues. They have what are called tropophylls and sporophylls. So I'll show you pictures of those. And they have root-like structures, not quite true roots, but root-like structures. And the evolution of these during what's called the Devonian period, 420 to 360 million years ago. MYA in geologist shorthand is million years ago. The evolution of these on land really heralds being able to move away from wet areas and cover large sections of continents, especially in tropical regions where it's moist. And they not only, so why did they change the climate, right? And 90% CO2 decline during this period. Why would these have such a dramatic effect versus, you know, all the plankton in the ocean or all the algae? And it's because they're big and they are able to pull in a lot of CO2 and turn it into organic matter, mainly cellulose. And this is the first time this has happened. Algae tend to just grow along coastlines and really thin ribbons around coastlines. Out in the deeper ocean, they don't grow, just single-celled planktons. Plankton has a high turnover rate. When it dies and it'll decay, it falls to the ocean floor and makes diatomaceous ooze and other things, but has a high turnover rate. These guys can build up, build up, build up, and there's not a lot during this time. They can eat cellulose either. So they are pulling this stuff out of the atmosphere. And let me check the chat bar here. Okay, and changing the Earth's atmosphere to what we have today, right? Everything we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this happening, right? No large animals would be here if it wasn't for this. And so that has a huge impact. I'm gonna talk about that in just a second. Examples of the different types of tissues that they have. This is a common horsetail that we have in our area. Oh, it's called common horsetail, Excitum arvens. And it has two different structures. So you often see this. These usually come up first. And these are what you call the sporophylls. They're yellowish in color. If you accidentally kick them, they'll often poof out a little yellow dusty cloud around them. And those are all the spores. That's the reproductive part. So they have, this is called a sporophyll. This is a stem or a branch or a leaf fill that just is for spores, not for photosynthesis. They then produce a tropophyll right here. This is a leaf or branch, stem, all in one on these guys that does photosynthesis, right? So two different ones. Now some ferns have both all in one. The sword fern is one that has the spores and the leaves. That's a later evolutionary advancement. But horsetails and things like deer fern, actually, deer fern has one frond that comes out, your tropophyll, and then your sporophyll frond sticks up higher and releases spores out from it. So this differentiation of tissue starts to lead the way to cones, right, later on forming. So kind of a cool one there. Okay, back to our 90% CO2 decline, because I think this stuff's fascinating, and I want to dive into this a little bit with you guys. So these things evolve, they evolve cellulose, they start to take in carbon, and we can do a little bit of math with that. But the main ones that really start to soak up carbon are gymnosperms. So out of these ferns and horsetails, right, the next up from club mosses, you see root-like structures, you see tropophills and sporophylls. We're gonna make a big jump at around 320 million years ago. We get gymnosperms showing up, and gymnosperms are conifers, right? That's what we think of. Now, not all are conifers. There's ginkgo, which is a gymnosperm, and cycads, but most of them are conifers or gymnosperms, and that's the things we think of. And a big thing that they have is they have seeds. They have seeds and woody hard tissue and true roots. So this is a huge jump in plant evolution. And why it's such a huge jump is that seeds are able to live in arid environments. Remember before I mentioned how plants store energy in a bulky way like starch. I think someone mentioned plants don't move, right? Animals, you think of movement. Plants don't get up and walk around. Trees stay rooted. And so they can store that energy underground. In a very bulky way, starch, right? Potatoes and things like that we eat, and that's energy storage. But one part of a plant that does need to move is the seed, and so plant seeds are high in oil, and oil is a fat, and it's more energetic to make, but it is much more efficient in the long run to transport, and so seeds carry a lot of oil. I do a demonstration in biology class with this where I burn a peanut and light it on fire. And most people predict that it'll burn for 10, 20, 30 seconds. And they can burn anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes with a really hot flame because there's so much energy stored up in there. So these are the first plants to produce these seeds that are high in fat and oil, and they can live in dry environments. They can live in really cold environments as well. They can handle freezing. Oils and lipids are good frost protection as well for seeds that are in the ground, keep them from cracking and breaking. And the oils that they produce around their leaves and needles also allow them to grow in cold environments. So with these two events, with ferns and horsetails creating massive amounts of cellulose, and then gymnosperms moving into dry and cold environments and seeds, you get this huge decline in atmospheric carbon dioxide. So in biology class, we talk about this. And a real simple way to frame this, you know, photosynthesis, right? Taking in carbon dioxide and water, and then making sugar, and then releasing oxygen. Water is 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. So if we're doing the math in the periodic table, let's just, oxygen is an 8 and hydrogen is a 1. So let's give it a 10, right? I'm doing a weak version of atomic math here, okay? Carbon dioxide, though, is actually heavier, 2 carbons and an oxygen, right? So now carbon is a 6, and then oxygen is an 8, and so, I'm sorry, carbon is a 4, my bad. And so we end up over here with a 20 on this one. So CO2 is twice as heavy as water. Glucose, on the other hand, then C6H12O6, comes in at substantially heavier. So we're taking all of the CO2 out of the atmosphere and we're turning it into something solid, right? We're taking a 20, we're turning it into a 96, we'll do the math on this, and then we create things like this. We create trees out of this, right? So most of the weight of a tree and the mass of a tree doesn't come from water, but it comes from the air. They're literally taking that gas and turning it into a solid, right? It's almost like reverse sublimation. And that CO2 is then locked up. And this is what we call carbon sequestration. And you may have heard of this in the news and talking about the environment and how there's these sources of carbon sequestration. There's places on the earth that soak up a lot of this and produce a lot of this biomass. And of course, our temperate coniferous forests are one of those. Not only, you know, did plants, conifers, start to store this up, but conifers get increasingly larger, right? We're talking about the largest things on Earth, the giant sequoia, the most massive thing on Earth, and the tallest thing being a coast redwood. So our forests soak up a ton of this carbon. And it's no wonder that we call this period the Carboniferous period. This is what is responsible for all of our major coal deposits around the planet. Come from this time period, right? When we talk about fossil fuels, we're not talking about fossil dinosaurs, we're talking about fossil plants, and we're mainly talking about, right, ferns, horsetails, and gymnosperms, conifers. When these things first came about, they soaked up so much carbon dioxide, they made the atmosphere richer in oxygen than it is today. And we get these massive insects, like 6-foot dragonflies or something like that, which is ridiculous and frightening. So I'm glad it balanced out to where it is today. But during this initial burst of radiation of evolution of plants on land, there was nothing that could eat cellulose and lignin. So as these plants died, they piled up and piled up and piled up. And there were no fungus, there were no insects yet that had evolved to be able to digest cellulose and lignin. So instead of them breaking down and rotting, you would have seen just massive buildup of these things, and they formed our coal beds that we burn today. The issue then today is that we're returning all of this sequestered carbon from hundreds of millions of years ago back to the atmosphere with no real plan, at least it seems, in place as far as how we're going to moderate that over time. So a big leap is seeds in conifers, and seeds are just inside little bracts, and cones are actually modified leaves. When you look at how they form and they grow under cellular structure, they're just a modified leaf, and so they open up and the little seed with a little wing on it just blows out. It's not really protected. The next big jump in plant evolution, and the last big jump, oh yeah, and if anybody ever has any questions, please jump in. Right? Thanks, plants, for the atmosphere. I would agree with that one. The upper right picture, if we're talking about here, now this, both of these are from Oregon, and I'm not sure, I think this one here is actually, I know where this one is. This is Willamette National Forest right here, where this person is standing below this tree. It's hard to find big conifers like this left, or we've cut down about 95% of them. But there are some wilderness areas that have some like these. Interestingly enough, a really great spot to see them is Oregon caves. Everybody goes there for the caves. There's trails up around that area, and they have some amazingly huge conifers back in there. And this one here, I am not sure where in the world these coal seams are exposed in cliffs. Usually you have to kind of deeper down mine them out. Okay. So a big jump here then is, oh, I'm looking at the chat bar again. What type of tree is that? That would be a Douglas fir. Yeah, this is definitely a Douglas fir right in here. Our state tree, right? And we don't see Douglas firs this big. Again, Oregon caves, you can see some massive Douglas firs there. Most of our big old growth is in wilderness areas. Some of it is coastal, so you have some big coastal spruce left in some of our state parks and things like that. And then to see big Douglas firs like this is just super rare. They have been mostly cut down, and I'm not sure what wilderness area or trail you would have to go on to see this. But most of our wilderness, a lot of it's in the high Cascades, so smaller trees, some mountain hemlock and things like that. The Siskiyou Mountains of Southern Oregon, Rogue Wilderness, Kalmiopsis Wilderness, the Illinois River Trail and the Rogue has some massive trees as well. So the big jump here, and again, jump in with questions at any time if you have any. The big jump here from Gymnosperms to where we are today is with seeds. And this is the last big evolutionary jump in plants. This lands us into today. And what separates angiosperm from what we call a gymnosperm, seed plants or angiosperms, is the seed is encased 100% inside an ovary with a fruit surrounding it. And there's many modifications of this. Originally, you get one seed and one fruit, and then you'll jump to these compound ones where you get multiple seeds inside a single ovary or a fused ovary, usually. When you cut into it, you can see that fusion and flowers to go with it, right? So the seed is going to attract someone to carry it off. So now we're talking about dispersal. Sorry, the fruit is going to attract someone to carry it off and then disperse the seed, versus gymnosperms, which are wind, right? These are wind pollinated, and these are wind dispersed things. So we really are not using animals yet as a mechanism. The big jump here is the use in animals as a pollinator and as a means of dispersion, carrying the seed away. That's what fruits are for. So the first angiosperms show up in the fossil record now around 130 million years ago. And there's no big benchmark at 130. Really, like when you think about that time frame, we're all thinking about dinosaurs. And people kind of forget that like this is a huge event in the history of life on Earth. And we get seeds internalized in fruit, and these start to replace conifers as the dominant plants on Earth. And this is really what we think of as plants today, although we live in a coniferous forest, and we'll talk about that. So there's a huge correlation here with angiosperms and flowering plants, with their evolution and the evolution and diversification of insects on land. Both of these, but again, the insects are following the plants. In this case, they kind of symbiotically push each other towards diversification. They dominate tropical climates still today. And gymnosperms, even still today, tend to dominate temperate climates. Although most of us don't go out hiking to look at conifers per se. Nobody's really, taking time to really look closely at the needles or cones more than they would flowers and stop and take pictures of those. And I'm even guilty of that. So some of the features of flowering plants, and all angiosperms have these features to some degree. They have 4 basic flower parts, right? You have a sepal, you have a petal, then you have the male reproductive part, right? The stamen consisting of a filament, and then the pollen sac, the anther. And then the female reproductive part divided into the stigma and then the style, which carries the pollen down into the ovary, which is where the seeds are encased inside. So they're protected. They're protected in there, and that's a great advantage there. Okay, so the flower attracts them. And then later on, the flower falls off and the fruit then attracts maybe something different to disperse it. And I have a few more photos and then we're done here, but I want to show you some of the ones in our areas. Now, these ones are cool. Question, can anybody name this plant? Extra credit if you can name it. Talk about this for a second here before I name it. So again, with Angiosperms, this retains some of the earliest forms. This is a flowering plant, but it looks like a conifer. Each individual seed is in its own little compartment here. So you're getting that, and you're getting that conifer spiral still on this, right? You don't really have true petals yet either. You have a big modified colorful leaf, and it's low down. It's low down to attract pollinators like flies and beetles, because bees and other pollinators that are attracted to, you know, colorful flowers higher up, those didn't evolve yet. So this is an ancient style of flowering plant. Anybody name this one? Let's see if you can. And again, these dominate swampy, boggy areas where you get lots of flies and beetles. And I encourage you to look closely at these. Look down inside the flowers and see the variety of native insects we have. This is a great opportunity to get a look at native insects. Grab a hand lens and a little jar and go out and take a look. And of course, return everything to where you got it from, but a little jar or plastic cup is a great way to kind of get a closer look at these things, and a magnifying glass is really cool too. These just finished their bloom, and we'll see, we got some guesses here. So let's go to the audience, see what we have. 2 for swamp lantern and 2 for skunk cabbage. So I've never heard swamp lantern. I like that name, actually. I almost like that better than skunk cabbage. Skunk cabbage is a little derogatory and refers more to the leaf. Actually, more swamp lantern. I like swamp lantern. I've never heard that. That's really cool. So it is called skunk cabbage or swamp lantern. And this is why we use scientific names, right? So Lyciciton Americanum, or I think Americanus, it was changed to recently, is the scientific name for this one, and probably has several common names, which we've just seen. So yeah, you're right about that one, skunk cabbage or swamp lantern. And again, an ancient style of flowering plant. Magnolias have a similar feature. They have petals, but they have that spiraling fruit that maintains that coniferous spiral on it, where each little carpel, it contains just a single seed inside of it. They haven't quite fused into that compound fused fruit that we see in later evolving flowering plants as well. So in our temperate climate, we live in a sea of conifers and gymnosperms still. When you look out over the landscape, this is pretty much what you're looking at. And can anybody name this location where I took these pictures from? Now again, we've cut most of our big conifers, as you can see all throughout in here. I didn't focus on that. This is a pano. I'm going from, I believe that is Mount St. Helens, then Mount Adams. Over in here, you would start to see maybe Mount Hood. All the way to the left, you can see the Columbia, and if I was to turn around, you would see the ocean from this spot. It's a really awesome hike, if anybody can name it. But when you look out across our landscape, we still live in a dominated coniferous forest, and coniferous forests are still doing all of that carbon sequestration. The tropics really are a narrow band. You know, the Amazon's the biggest, and then you've got the Congo, and then you have Indonesia, right? But it's not a lot of land compared to northern temperate zones, the boreal forests. And these areas contain, you know, huge swaths of conifer forest still. We're still dominated by this ancient landscape. It really does rule in the north. Ferns, mosses, liverworts, lichens, and conifers. And that is our environment as well. Yes, Jesse Jones, Saddle Mountain. Good job. Skunk cabbage is also called black bear laxative. I like that. I have heard that, and I tried to eat the root one time. You can dig it up and bake it. This was thanks to Rhoda Love. I was 21. I was studying botany, and I really got into ethnobotany, and there's a whole ton of really good books on that. And there's also a lot of old school funky ones, and I'm not sure where I got this advice from, but I dug it up and I tried to bake it. It tastes peppery and not very good. And I don't remember getting diarrhea, but And I'm looking back here. Lincoln City has a huge Sitka spruce in Regatta Park. We estimate it to be older than 400 years old, and it's just massive. That's awesome. Regatta Park, I'll have to go there. I don't know if I've been to that spot. I know we have some huge spruce, you know, peppered out along the coast here in different places. I know on the, I'm trying to think of the parks. On the road between Newport and Florence, there's some really nice, there's Cummins Creek, which is a wilderness area, a really small one. And you should check that out if you get a chance. I've hiked into there and there's some beautiful big trees there as well. Jesse Jones Saddle Mount. Cape Meares, I believe, is the largest in the state. Is that right? I am not sure. I don't think the octopus tree is actually the largest in the state. It might be in diameter, but it's certainly not in height, because spruce can get, well, in the redwood, spruce get over 300 feet tall. Prairie Creek State Park, just north of Eureka, Archaea, has some massive Sitka spruce in there, but they've had to contend with redwoods, right, commingling with them. So natural selection has favored them to just go vertical in that area. Yeah. All right, so Saddle Mountain here is a great place to see angiosperms. Of course, you find them everywhere, right? You can go out in your yard and you're going to find them grass. But if you want to see a good diversity and a native diversity, there's a number of endemic plants, meaning they only grow there. And it has these alpine meadows, and there are some species that grow just in these coastal alpine meadows that have evolved to this habitat that are close relatives, you know, in the lower areas, but you get this huge diversity of wildflowers up there, and it's a great hike. Strenuous but fun. So I'm going to show some pictures there of some of these flowering plants. So when we talk about the coevolution of insects with flowers, you can see that happening right in here. And anybody can name either of these plants. I'll give a little extra credit before I blather off their names. These are all taken on the Saddle Mountain Trail. I just went into that photo album and selected from there. The light is really fantastic up there, so that's one of the reasons to photograph from there. But this is a particularly beautiful plant. It blooms early in the spring on Saddle Mountain, so it might be done already. And this is a little spider that actually blends in pretty well with the yellow of the flower here, and it's waiting for other insects to come in. So now we've got an entire food web that starts with the flower itself, right, or food chain in this case. It starts with the flower itself, attracting pollinators to it, and then you've got carnivores, right? More specifically insectivore, sitting on top of there waiting to pounce on those. Really cool looking little spiders, like doing like some kind of Karate Kid move there. Can anybody name these flowers here before I move on? Let's see what we got. This is a really, oh, okay, we got one here. Let's go. It is a crab spider. Yes, exactly. And good job. Good job, Chrissy. Chocolate lily. It is a chocolate lily in the genus Fritillaria. Ooh, some sort of Fritillaria. There we go. I'm not sure the exact species of this one. Fritillaria have edible roots as well. And you can see that generalized flower form. Now, lilies, both of these are lilies. I think someone said fawn lily, erythronium on the right there. This erythronium is cool for a couple reasons. One, it's got twice the amount of petals that a normal erythronium would have. If you look at that, it's kind of gone crazy. Lilies lack petals. They have what are well, they lack sepals. They have what are called tepals. They don't have the sepals below them. That's one of the features of that particular plant family, but they still maintain the characteristics of an angiosperm. What is really cool about all of this, I hope you can take this away from this, is that as plants moved out of water, there's really just a few groups, right? We can name, most of us can name the groups of animals. Most of us can go amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and then we'll lump all the fish together. But most of us aren't think, well, plants, it's just crazy, I can't even go there. But you really can, right? You really can. You can go mosses and liverworts, ferns and horsetails, conifers, and flowering plants, right? You could get more specific in there, but those are the major groups. And each one of those, similar to amphibians evolved from fish, and there's features, gills and eggs without a hard shell, to reptiles having a hard shell, to birds, to mammals There's this linear progression, right, in evolutionary features that you can see. And once you're in a group, that group shares those features, right? Gymnosperms have seeds, generally cones and things like that, ferns and spores and things like that, Tropophylls, Sporophylls. Flowering plants, they all have the petals, the male reproductive parts, the stamens, and then the female reproductive parts, the pistils, the stigmas, the ovaries. All of them have that in their own variation. And each plant family then has its own special formula that you could look at to identify it. Okay, got a few more slides, and we'll wrap this up. Oh, so Ryan Corey writes that bears coming out of hibernation are drawn to it, referring to skunk cabbage or swamp lantern, Lyciciton or something like that, and to start their system. I have heard that bears going into hibernation will eat like a ton of really heavy material and cellulose, like bark, basically to create what's called a fecal plug. They constipate themselves on purpose. And then I guess when they come out of it, they dig this up and eat it to get it going. All right, good stuff. That is good material for high school class. Thank you, sir. All right, couple more flowers here just to talk about with Saddle Mountain and some of the cool features there. I don't have much to say about these other than this was just really pretty. I don't know the exact species here. This is in the pink family or Campanulaceae, and there's certain features that has, such as in the sepals right down in here. If you can see my cursor, there's a little scale that surrounds those, and that is a feature of that family, along with opposite leaves. You've got Indian paintbrush here, and then a lomatium, which is a wild carrot that grows in rocky areas. And there's different lomations. They all seem to grow in rocky areas. From I saw them on the river the other day, kayaking on just the rocks right above the river, all the way up to mountaintops, and then in deserts as well. Really cool plant. And each one of these has its own pollinator that it's going to attract. And we have a huge diversity of insects. And again, the insects follow the plants. So as the plants need to diversify and attract new pollinators, they sort of drive that evolutionary arms race. Photosynthesis has driven all of life's arms race here on Earth. And that's really the whole point of this, is it all starts with that first initial revolution of photosynthesis with cyanobacteria, then moving all the way. And these plants carry those characteristics still. The chlorophyll or the chloroplasts that they have inside that make them green are those bacteria, those cyanobacteria that first invaded another cell, right, 2 billion years ago, that endosymbiotic thing. And those thylakoides, the membrane of those bacteria, are now the thylakoids that are absorbing the light and giving us the green color and the oxygen of the atmosphere, and producing the sugars that all of us use for energy every single day here on Earth. Cool stuff. And I just wanted to show you a couple more pictures of these things because I think these are fantastic. If anybody can name this plant right here on the right, this is one of the most amazing tricks of flowers, and some plants do this. They've gotten rid of the petals completely. So you have the sepals here, and then the anthers, the filaments actually on these, so the stamens are purple in color, and they attract the pollinator. So they hang down, just almost looks like a jellyfish with its tentacles. And then these are the pollen sacs on here. These are the actual anthers. And these plants are generally male and female. So this one would be all male, then another one would be female. And pollinators are attracted to just the color of these, and they come on in and they get dusted with those as they fly in, which is really cool. And you can see my finger here for scale on these. You'll find this in forest along edges and things like that. Anybody want to guess at any of these plants? These are all from Saddle Mountain again, and again, just showing you the diversity of flowering plants and how many forms there are. Similar to, like with animal evolution, that multicellular ability led to this radiation, right? This cellular technological evolution, and life just boom. And once plants delved into flowers and fruits, the ability for insects to reproduce fast, really fast, right? And in huge numbers. That allows for evolution to work fast. Natural selection operates on 4 steps, and the first one is overproduction and then variation. You have both of those with insects. And so insects are able to adaptively radiate quickly, and plants are able to keep up with them. And so those two have just made this plant diversity huge across our planet, especially with flowering plants. Conifers are going to evolve more slowly because they're wind pollinated, wind dispersed. Conifer evolution is going to be driven by abiotic factors, meaning just physical environmental factors, whereas flowering plant evolution is driven by biotic factors. And so pedal to the metal there, and we see the diversity we have today. Okay, I've got another chat here, and then I'm going to wrap this up. The top of these bald rock tops are described as unique islands in the sky with rare species not found in other places. That is true. Describes them as the Galapagos Islands of the Coast Range, and it is Thalictrum. Nice job. Nice job on the Thalictrum. Good job. Yeah, Saddle Mountain, Mary's Peak, there's a few others that have these islands, and they are similar to the Galapagos because they get genetically isolated. Species up there don't really cross-pollinate or crossbreed with others, plus the physical environment of these mountain balds is punishing, and so that pushes evolution as well, and then that genetic isolation. Exactly. So it would be similar to the Galapagos of the Coast Range. The other Galapagos of Oregon, of course, would be the Siskiyou Mountains down in there, Siskiyou Climates. Down at the bottom, we have Shooting Star, Dodecathium, and then we have, of course, Trillium, one of our favorites. And that is the end of my slideshow talking about plants and plant evolution. Started, the theme is ancient plants, of course, kind of understanding that concept, that breadth of time and all the events that have led up to it and led to our climate being what it is. And I hope I kind of touched on some of the environmental issues that we have today and give you some context for them and why they are so pressing and important, and hopefully we make fact-based decisions around those. So I'm going to open up to any general questions and then turn it over to Chrissy.
Thanks, Slade. I'm waiting to see if any more come in. It was super fascinating. And we have some people saying thank you. And I do want to let you know that someone shared a link to that, to the sickest spruce tree.
Okay, cool.
So I can share that with you, but it's here in the Facebook feed. So if you're curious about that. Got some more thank yous coming in. So
yeah. Sorry to feature Saddle Mountain and not, Netarts Bay, but just, had to do it.
It's okay. I mean, those things, those mountaintops that are speckled along our coastline are really interesting, and they are just north of us too, so there's a lot of things that are about these places, and it's good information. And certainly there's no lack of swamp lantern, which I also really enjoyed in Netarts Bay.
Yeah, Netarts Bay is great, and the Cape Lookout Trail is another really wonderful trail to hike and actually get out into the woods. It's close by.
We do have one more. We have one question coming in here. I was curious what you suspect is the most preserved trait in plants today from ancient plants.
Oh my gosh! Well, that's a great question. I'm used to questions like, is this going to be on a test? But let me think here. Most preserved trait from ancient plants. It depends what we're talking about, really. I guess that first branching off of one part is for reproduction, like a sporophyll and a tropophyll. So like a leaf. Really like a true leaf, and then a true reproductive part that are separate would be one of them, or just chloroplasts and chloroplasts themselves going all the way back to bacteria, as being that single thread that runs through everything continuously, unbroken.
Yeah, that was a good question. That was a good question. We're also hearing, I'm also seeing here, it's true, there is a big cedar in Rockaway and a new trail created to that big cedar. Well, and I do think that Cape Meares, maybe it has the tallest sickest spruce in Oregon. There's the octopus tree, but then there's also the other big tree. The second a while, and then the top tree sadly fell, and Cape Meares took the prize. I think.
If you hike that trail, if you hike that trail on Cape Meares, that's on the north side, right as you're about to pull into the turnoff for the lighthouse, there's that trail that takes you down to the beach. That has some massive spruce on that because it's on the north side, so it's protected from that winter southwest wind, and there's some monsters in there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. If you go on that trail, make sure you're checking your tide tables and things like that, because it can be tricky to get back up into that trailhead.
Yeah, if you're not good on your feet, don't even do that last part down to the beach, because
It's a harder one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun.
For sure. All right. Well, I'll see if any more questions speckle in, but I'm not seeing anything in the news feed. So remember, if you have a question, just chat it here. Slade and I will hang out for a few minutes after we officially end the presentation too, just in case you're in the middle of typing and need to push send. And I don't have anything in my email, so just as I was saying that, look at that. What is your favorite plant genus?
Oh, genus. Oh, genus. Now, birds. That's a good one. Okay, so favorite plant genus, and I'm just gonna have to. I don't want to be too cliche here, but probably Castanea or Penstemon, really, to be honest with you. Flowering plants, they're beautiful. I worked in Bend, Oregon doing surveys for this green Castanea, Castanea chlorotica, and I spent my entire summer looking for it. And I never got tired of doing that, so that's got to be one of my favorites.
Yeah. Is there a more common name that people would associate with that?
Yeah, sorry. Castanea is Indian paintbrush.
Oh, got you. Which is a lovely fun. Actually, didn't know that much.
They're really beautiful. And just the name itself, right? That's a pretty sounding name.
Yeah. Really awesome. Awesome flower.
Versus deer fern, which is Latin name is Blechnum spicant, which just doesn't sound good. Ugh.
I found a chocolate lily on the Neocani Mountain Trail with my friend Alex, and we found one of those yellow crab spiders inside it, and we probably laid down on the ground and took pictures of it for about 15 minutes. But that's just kind of how we roll when we find such things as that. But that's a really beautiful flower, and it's super cool that that spider is identical to the color of the inside of a chocolate lily.
Yeah, it's just a great example of evolution in action there. Like it's perfect. And I'm the same way when I hike too. I mean, springtime, I am slow hiking, and if you're not into plants, don't hike with me, because you're going to be annoyed, because I'm going to be laying down a lot and taking photos.
Yeah, that's how we ultimately had to just kind of close the plant book so we could get to the end of the trail, because
it's like 3 hours up and 30 minutes back, right?
It's taking a little too much time. Okay, well, I really appreciate you doing this yet again with us, and I just can't tell you how grateful we are that you're sharing all your knowledge. And I did have a comment up here about how lucky the Tillamook kids are to have a teacher like you in the community, and I just got to agree. I mean, I'm super excited for my kids to get to learn from you, and I'm super excited that I get to learn from you right now. So
thanks, buddy.
Yeah. We usually do this one on the trail. We usually have in the kind of a presentation, and then we followed up like walking the trails and finding these plants. And of course we would have loved to have done that, but that's not a possibility right now. If there presents an opportunity for that, we certainly will let you guys know, and certainly we'll include that next year. Hopefully we won't have to be quarantining ourselves through this wonderful time to go learn about plants. That said, I should just mention that about our schedule. So we have released a full schedule just to kind of let you know what kind of things we were planning on doing. Our goal is to bring as much of what we can of that to you virtually until it's safe for us to go out and explore together. So if you ever have questions about what we are going to offer or not going to offer, please do get a hold of us. It is really challenging for us to know exactly what that's going to be ahead of time. So I just wanted to put that out there before we signed off, is that we're working to bring a couple more things to you virtually, probably in June, and then we'll just play it by ear for the rest of the summer, and so that we can make great choices to bring you something educational, entertaining, but also do it in a safe way. So yeah. So I think next up, you should be looking for some things related to tide pool animals, which is something else I know that Slade enjoys a lot. And then we will also be looking to bring some content to you regarding oysters, which we often do the art of growing oyster tours this time of year and actually throughout the fall too. So we will bring you some content on that as well. So please stay connected with us. And the best way to stay up to date is to check our Facebook and Instagram page, or on our website, we have an events page. I did post Slade's presentation in the comment box so you guys can get access to that, but I also put a link up to some pages on our website that talk about ferns and different algae that kind of go along with some of the stuff that Slade has talked about today. So scan back in there and grab those links and bookmark them for yourself so you can sit down and enjoy them when you're ready to. So with that, I think we're just saying goodbye. And know that we're just monitoring this comments for a few minutes after we end our live feed. Thanks again.
And thanks everybody for commenting and participating. That was great.
It was so fun. I really love this presentation. I'm so glad we're doing it and repeating it. So, all right, we'll have a wonderful, what looks to be rainy Saturday. All right, take care. Goodbye, everybody.